Right, well, before we move on with the subject about the soul, what the human soul does, what we would like to do is just channel a spirit who didn't know or did hear of divine truth when he was on earth, but when he passed he realised there was a whole heap of things about it that he didn't really understand, even though he had read a fair portion of the Paget messages. And this spirit is Eugene Morgan. So those of you who've read the Paget messages, does that name ring a bell, Eugene Morgan, for some of you? Some of you. What happened was that when James Paget channeled material, he wrote a lot of it down, and Dr. Stone eventually became his friend, and they together, every time Paget channeled, generally Dr. Stone was there many times as well after a while. And then after a while, after a few years of doing this, they met some other people through different circles, I suppose what you would call is spiritualist circles. And one of those persons they met was a young man called Eugene Morgan. And he had a Catholic background, and he became interested in the messages. And I won't say too much more than that, just as an introduction for those of you who have not heard his name. And he was alive in the early 19th, so the earliest 20th century. He was, I think he was born in the 19th century, but late 19th century, and then we'll let him explain all of that. But so he heard the Paget messages, and he actually started doing mediumship with Catholic spirits, and particularly Catholic priests and ministers and bishops and everything. So it was a very interesting mediumship there, and not a lot of those were. Some of those were recorded, but most of that was not actually recorded. It didn't survive history in terms of his interactions with those particular spirits. But we thought what we would like to do is ask Eugene to come and talk to you about what he thought he felt, what he thought he believed when he was on Earth, by the time he left Earth, compared with where he now is and what he now knows in comparison. Does that make sense to you? Just to give you an idea of what it's like when you think you know things intellectually but don't really grasp them emotionally.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Pleasure, Eugene. Yeah.
It's my first time in this position.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. No one's thought to channel you before, by the looks.
No, it's quite exciting.
Yeah.
So I understand what you'd like me to talk about.
Yeah. So perhaps if you give the audience here, some of them don't know of you or anything, perhaps if you give them a little bit of background about how you heard of divine truth when you were on Earth. Yep.
Yeah, it was through Dr. Stone, through Leslie.
Yeah.
And I was quite interested in the occult, we would have called it then, and I was quite fascinated by the science of mediumship, how this phenomena worked, and I began to get a good eye. I sort of frequented different circles, as you referred to them, and I began to have an eye for who was faking and who was real. Yeah. And so when I met Dr. Stone, he told me about James, and I had the opportunity to visit while channeling was happening there, and I quickly felt, especially not just when I was present but reading the messages that had been received, that there was certainly substance there, and there was things that really appealed to me on many levels. I felt the authenticity of the channeling, but also I felt the substance in what was being shared. It quite appealed to me.
So that caused you to experiment with prayer?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. And I did receive some of God's love while I was on Earth. And as you had mentioned, I did go on to do my own mediumship, which was quite fun and really lively. I enjoyed the lively discussions that I got to have with spirits. And yeah, it was quite fulfilling, but obviously I did pass, as you know, I did pass with quite some falsehood still in me. I passed really with, I wouldn't call it an air of superiority, but I certainly had some level of arrogance about what I thought that I knew.
Yeah.
And there were certainly things for me to face in this life.
Yeah.
I was very fortunate to have received some of God's love when I was on earth, but that didn't alter certain beliefs that I had inside of me, and how those beliefs impacted on my entry into the spirit life.
So perhaps you can sort of explain to the audience what it was like having an intellectual concept, and when you passed, did what happened to you physically after you passed match the intellectual concept you had of what would happen?
Not yes, in some case, so no, largely no, it didn't match.
Yeah.
I thought that you would meet me when I passed, and as we have met, obviously, and you have assisted me in this life, but I wasn't met by you, so that was a bit of a letdown. And also, I suppose I believed that I would enter into the fourth or fifth sphere of the spirit life, and that certainly didn't happen. I entered into a higher part of the first sphere. And
that primarily because?
Well, there were certain feelings of entitlement that I had.
I mean primarily on a positive. What was the primary reason why it was the higher part? In a positive sense. And
from where I am now, that's quite a lower condition.
I know.
My faith in God really put me in that position. The fact that I had received some of God's love. And it wasn't a great deal of love, obviously, because I was in that position. But
and where would you have estimated you would have arrived if you hadn't had that faith?
Into the hells. There were certain... I hadn't lived a debaucherous life on earth by any means, but there were certain feelings, such as I was referring to, about entitlement, certain feelings in relation to my mother, wanting to be mothered.
Nursed.
Yes, and that made me quite demanding on the women around me. And also just I felt that things of the spiritual life had more importance than those of the physical one. And
so you didn't properly live a life on earth, is that what you're saying?
Yes. I avoided a lot of circumstances and responsibilities in my earth life, thinking that they were inconsequential, but in fact, as we know now, they had a large bearing on what happened after I passed.
And if you didn't view them as inconsequential, you would have probably resolved some things that would have helped you progress even further, wouldn't it?
That's right. That's why it has such an impact. I would have, and I would have understood my own personality a lot better as well. While I am someone who enjoys lively debate and I'm quite a force in many ways, I didn't want to assert myself in my earth life. I didn't want to create. It's
interesting though, you did assert yourself in your earth life when you were doing mediumship with the Catholic spirits, for example.
Yes.
But not actually in your own life.
That's right. I asserted my opinions and my desires to educate and change. But there's much more that I could have done with the Catholic Church on earth that would have helped me to deal with many fears and angers and entitlements that I have, that I had when I passed. And it would have benefited many people, not just myself as well.
As you know, Mary and I enjoyed watching you do some mediumship with those Catholic spirits at times. And what gave you the conviction to, while you're on earth, to do this mediumship with conviction, but actually also not have conviction about dealing with your own life on earth?
I was very concerned about how other people would view me and treat me. I suppose I when I was interacting with spirits, it felt like an honest exchange that I could have that didn't challenge my position in my society or the respect that I felt I deserved.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the major reasons.
But you were, like you said, you also enjoyed a good debate as well. Obviously, that helped. But in your earth life, did you enjoy a good debate as well?
To some degree, to the degree where I felt that it wouldn't challenge my comforts, I suppose, the esteem in which others held me with.
Yeah.
So there was certain friends and certain people that I would have lively debates with, and as my wife would tell you, I was quite an opinionated person. I wasn't afraid to assert myself in that way. But certainly matters about spiritual change and the spiritual sins, if I can call them that. By that I mean the sins relating to spiritual belief on earth. I was very unwilling to challenge those. I wanted, in fact, the spirits that I was speaking to make those changes. Rather than,
ironically.
Yes.
And
I
perhaps a little hypocritically.
Yes. Hence my issues with entry into the spirit life. I thought that I knew it all, and yet I wasn't willing to examine my own spiritual sins in terms of honesty and faithfulness in God in my everyday life.
Yeah. And when you look back on it now, you can see that a lot of that was because of emotions you didn't want to face, wasn't it? Yeah. So after you passed, then, what emotions did you find yourself having to face that you didn't expect you would have to face?
Initially, there was a lot of, I suppose, pain and regret. When I was shown what I could have achieved. So the sort of the pain of omission, really, of not doing the things you could have done. Yeah, absolutely. So, and also, initially, there was quite a bit of shock and indignation, if I could say about the position that I was in. Certainly, even
though it was in the middle of or top of the first sphere, you were still upset about that.
Well, it wasn't.
You expected more than that, did you?
I mean, if I'm honest. But it wasn't that, as you know, the top of the first sphere is not a disappointing place in which to reside.
No.
It was more a feeling that I thought I should get more reward for what I had done.
Right.
So that's what I mean when I'm talking about entitlement.
So you intellectually did a lot of things that you thought you would be rewarded for, not realising that actually because the beliefs and the emotions hadn't changed, there would be no reward.
Yes. And I had to face it that in many ways I was quite cowardly. I thought of myself as quite a trailblazer, and yet I had to face that there were many ways in my life where I hadn't grown into a man in terms of being able to deal with a partner as an equal, and nor had I placed myself in my society as a leader. I had wanted to be accepted far too much for that.
So what was your background on earth in terms of your upbringing? Did you come from a wealthy family or an average family, or what was the go there?
I would say it was upper middle class, if we had to define it.
So you had enough money for you to not have to necessarily work, is that?
I did work. I wouldn't say it was that affluent, but certainly I wasn't someone who had to work very hard every day like many of the people around me in the society.
And what was the relationship between yourself and your mother and your father?
I would say I was coddled by my mother, that I was... do you know what I mean by that?
I do, but maybe a bit more information for the audience sake, maybe.
I was... my mother treated me as if she should serve me, she should care for me, especially physically and emotionally. That similar to some of the things you've spoken about today. That any difficulty that I had, particularly with my physical self, that she would attend to me, and it was a way really of diminishing my growth into being a man who was independent. Yeah.
So you came to have a fair bit of dependency on your mother.
Yeah. And I always felt quite a lot of distance from my father, as in that he was quite withdrawn and distant from the workings of the family and from me myself, that he wasn't that interested. I had an older sibling, and so I wasn't looked upon to sort of forward the family name or provide
do the family business and all those things.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I felt sort of I was never in any way neglected physically, but I just felt quite isolated in that relationship with him, which is part of what made my friendship with Dr. Stone quite a rich one.
Yeah, because he's sort of like a father figure
Yes.
for you. Yep.
Yeah.
Because how much was there age difference between the two of you, between Dr. Stone and yourself?
20 years.
Yeah, and between Paget and yourself it was a lot more than that, wasn't it? Yeah, good-o. Now, where are you now? What location are you in?
In the fifth sphere now.
Fifth sphere of the spirit world, yep. And if you look at how that's happened, did you expect it to take this long to get to the fifth sphere of the spirit world when you first passed?
No, I didn't. I thought it would take me. It hasn't been I have to say, and perhaps
not that long, but
no, it hasn't been that long. But I really thought that I would pass somewhere more approximating
where you are now.
Where I am now.
Yeah.
And I'm very fortunate to have had good helpers.
Yeah, good friends.
Yeah.
Good friends are a big,
Yes.
one who can share truth. Hey, big help. Yeah.
But that early time in the first and even in the second sphere, there was a lot for me to learn about personal responsibility and really becoming independent of other people's affections, if we can call it that. And letting go of
being a self-responsible individual. Yeah. Which a lot of this audience is going to have to deal with, don't you?
Yeah. It's a big problem on the earth.
Yeah.
And
becoming a bigger one too, isn't it? Really.
Seemingly. There's a lot of work trying to help people, but obviously it's quite difficult to reach the earth at the moment.
Yeah.
From a loving perspective.
Yeah, for sure. Well, perhaps some of the people here might want to ask you some questions. Is that all right with you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So let's start. We've got our mics. Who's got our mics? So we haven't got our mics, so let's just sort that out. I'll just. I won't do the clap now. It's too late now. Okay. Okay. So if we start with Max down the front here, and then we'll go up the back on this side. Yep. That's it.
What have you found most difficult dealing with in the spirit world? Because I relate to your injuries a lot. And did you have a relationship with God when you were on earth?
Yes, I'll answer the second question first. I would say that I had some feelings for God on earth, and I had been fortunate to receive God's love on earth, but I don't really feel that my relationship with God was really formed until I grew in terms of my personal responsibility. So the hardest thing for me to deal with when I entered the spirit life was probably the emotions in relation to my mother, and feeling that I should be able to define myself as she defined me, if that makes sense, to have the opinion of myself that she had held of me. And it took me some time to correct that in terms of what God's view of myself and my sin was at that time. So that was the hardest thing for me to deal with. I was fortunate enough to have expressed some of my will in terms of spiritual pursuits before I had passed, but certainly I came to understand that my relationship with God was very limited by certain, what you would call addictions I had on earth.
Particularly with mother.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And we're up the back here.
What specific faith did you have in God?
So can you a bit closer for us?
What specific faith did you have in God?
What specific faith did you have in God? Yep.
Yeah. Okay, I believed in the... once I had sat with James and Leslie and read many of the messages and been in the presence of the messages being received, I believed very strongly in, I had faith in the possibility of receiving God's love, especially initially, and that's when I did receive God's love. So after that point, when I entered the spirit world, I would have said I had faith that God was a loving God, but I did have to correct that because what I thought God should provide for me in terms of God's love was still largely tainted by that relationship that I'd had with my mother and the belief that God would reward certain inactions and actions on my part and certain attitudes towards women and towards my father as well. I came to see that God didn't reward those things, so I did go through a period of feeling that I had a lessened faith in God after I passed. And also I saw that there was a lot of truth about God that I had neglected in my life on earth. I hadn't been brave enough to uphold what I felt from God in my day-to-day life. In terms of that, I mean, in my love for truth and the way that God's universe works, so the spirit life and so on, and the importance of truth, I hadn't been willing to display that in my life with others in my society, and so I came to see I didn't have much faith in the truth, actually. I had a love for it, but no faith in it. So I would say that the core of my faith was really just that God was a loving God, but even that had to be corrected.
And can I ask, with that, you said you received a bit of God's love right at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
When you look back on it now, did that stop sort of soon after you received?
Yeah.
And as you would now identify it, why did it stop?
Yeah, so initially I would say there was 2 instances where I felt that I received, or I did, I know now, but at the time I felt that I had also, and that was in the presence of the channeling occurring. And in those moments, obviously, my faith was a lot, and my feeling for God sort of opened up. I felt not just a longing, it was a longing for God, not to get anything, but just a fascination and a wonder about God that really opened my heart up in those times. After that point, I would have to say, knowing what I know now, that there was a certain level of arrogance that I gained by believing that I knew the truth and that others didn't, and that there was these areas that I've referred to where I wanted things to come easier. I didn't want to take responsibility for creating in my physical life. So I felt I was entitled to certain things, and I didn't take opportunities to really give and love in terms of creating a business or in terms of working with the church and all these areas where I could have taken more physical action to actually love myself and others. I hadn't done that. So that's why it stopped, I'm sure.
Okay. Okay, so if we come forward on this side, so next one down, and on this side, up the back, just...
Hi, Eugene. Thank you.
Close with the mic so we can hear you better.
Hi, Eugene. Thank you. You had said that, I think you said you were shown you could have been a leader Is that what you said you realized afterwards? Do you mean that if you had been brave and demonstrated the truth, that you could have been a leader or affected more change here?
Yes, exactly. That's exactly what I mean. I believe that God has created the potential for leadership in everyone. It depends on how much they develop themselves in terms of their character and their passion. But certainly I was shown that I had already developed certain parts of my passion, and it was only certain one or two emotions that held me back from really impacting change from the early part of the last century in Catholicism. And that, to me, has been very painful to work through, because obviously I can see there are many, many, many changes that haven't occurred within that faith that could have occurred. And perhaps I could have been a part of altering that over 100 years ago.
Thank you very much.
Hello. I have two questions. First is, what lessons are you learning in the fifth sphere? And the second question is, how can we on Earth figure out what sphere we're in?
Well, the answer to the first question, in the fifth sphere, there's a lot of fun now in my spirit life and a lot of fun lessons, but there's a lot about learning. Obviously, every sphere that you pass through after the second sphere into the third sphere, there's a lot of refining of things that you've already let go of a lot of sin about. And there's still sin that I'm releasing, but there's a refinement. And so at the moment, there's still refinement happening in terms of my relationship with women and my relationship to the other half of me, if you like. So now there's, in the fifth sphere, it comes this opportunity to develop the soulmate longing and to really come to have God's definition of the complete soul. I would say that in this sphere, that's the first time that I've really started to long to God for God's conception of my soul and what that experience will be like. I would say that that's something that the truth about that was introduced to me in the third and fourth spheres, but it's not until this point that I feel that I can really start to open a longing, or it's not that I feel that, it's not that I feel, it's just that I don't feel restricted in that process now. And so there's a lot about who am I really by God's definition, and a refinement of how I come to love myself and love the other half of me, and beginning to gain feelings about the fact that that there is another half of me, and that's a really exciting thing to start to feel emotionally, rather than it just being a concept that I've known about since my earth life, really. But now to come to experience God's feelings about that is very exciting. In terms of knowing what sphere you're in on Earth, well, I think that depends a lot on the level of humility that you have. The question often comes from a lack of humility, or from a desire to gain a sense of achievement, or to have a sense of competition fulfilled. And on Earth, the Earth life is very governed by these kinds of sins about ranking and rating and competition. And so usually the question or the curiosity comes from that place. And so that's a very first sphere motivation, if we can say that. So with that motivation, you're very likely in the first sphere. As you let go of that, you'll probably be far less interested in what sphere you're in, because even here we talk about spheres, but each person is not really engaged in this idea that they're not ticking something off as a badge of saying, "Oh, here I am in this sphere." It's more, especially when you develop with God, there's an intensifying longing to have God's opinion on everything and to bring yourself into harmony with God's desires and God's loving interest in yourself. And so that kind of surpasses spheres, if you like. That it's just that in each new sphere you understand, oh, this longing is more intensified, and the truth that I'm receiving is more. There's more of it, and obviously your surroundings improve. But there's many ways to know. You can find out in your sleep state. You will know in your sleep state. Someone will tell you if you don't know.
Can we say too, though, that whatever sphere you're in, once you have the humble attitude, you really want to maximise the amount of learning you can achieve in that sphere. So instead of going, I just want to be in the next one, you're really focused on how much can I learn while I'm here about everything, about God, about the universe, about me, about, my sin. You want to try to maximise the effect of being in the location you're in to the maximum benefit to yourself and to others around you.
It's like when you visit somewhere that you're very interested in. You want to see and learn and understand as much as you can, and you're not in a hurry to move to the next place because you really want to experience the place that you're in. So the higher you, and my experience is that the more that I progress, the more that feeling intensifies also.
Yeah. Let's come down to Michael, and then we'll go back to Yang there, and on this side we'll come down to Jennifer right down the front, and then we'll work our way back.
Pleasure to meet you.
And
closer with the mic too, Mark.
Okay.
Yep.
Picking up on what Jesus was saying, I want to ask specifically about the male injury that I have about liking attention, and what you found in the first sphere that helped you, but also I know I'm a first sphere condition, so what kind of lessons did you learn there that I can apply here, or do I really need to pay attention to?
Sure. So in the first sphere, the relationship with my father also had obviously a bearing on where I was, and it's a great question to ask, how to deal with those things now, because that will improve your transition to the spirit life as well. Certainly there was the opportunity to meet my father, but also to revisit times in my life where, especially in my very young life, where I felt very alone in that relationship and very overlooked. So, and it was coming to feel that my worth, or how much my sense of self should not be defined through that relationship. But I couldn't really learn those lessons until I had grieved the absence that I felt in that relationship. Because a lot of, obviously as a child, I didn't understand it very intellectually, and so we're talking about this intellectually. But there was just a feeling of loneliness, I suppose, more than understanding it as an absence, because I hadn't had the presence of it. I hadn't had a father who went away. I just felt that felt very lonely and somewhat unimportant to other men. And I could then, once I was aware emotionally of those feelings, letting those things go really helped me to receive more of God's love. I hadn't realised how much that sense of there was an anger about the sense of unimportance initially that I had to release, and then the feeling of unimportance that I had in that relationship. Once that was gone from me, I felt almost like my relationship with God started again. It was almost that, it was almost like receiving God's love for the first time again once I had released those feelings. Because really, from a soul perspective, there was love that could reach parts of me that just couldn't before. God's love could enter me and reach parts of me that were previously blocked. So I would encourage you in the same process now in your earth life. Yeah.
And Eugene also found that his relationship with his mother almost masked his problems with his father too. So
certainly,
yeah.
It was my attachment to my mother was also related to that issue with my father. It was an avoidance of that. If it's like for yourself, if you imagine your life without your mother being there, and without the things that you feel that you got from your mother, what that would feel like. It's quite isolated and quite alone, and that's really what I had to experience. I had used my attachment to my mother was driven in part just by the avoidance of those feelings. Yeah.
Jennifer, yeah.
For those of us who have issues with arrogance, what can you recommend?
Prayer, I would probably recommend that for every problem, but certainly prayer is so important, because to enter a state of prayer is to enter a state of saying, there is something I do not know, there is something I do not have. And the issue of arrogance the injury of arrogance is the opposite of those things. It's saying that I know and I have, and therefore I am better. And prayer with God is the single most powerful thing you can do, actually, to deal with the injury of arrogance. Over time, if you are genuine in your prayer, many things will be exposed to you about how insincere your prayer is, if you like, which will only deepen the potency of your prayer, if that makes... I know that sounds a little fluffy, but what I mean by that is if you can come to God in a state of prayer, there has to be at least some intellectual acknowledgement that there's something that you do not have, God's love and God's knowledge. And but from my experience, the more I engaged in that prayer, the more I realised that I didn't want to be in that state with God. I didn't want to acknowledge that there was something lacking that only God could give, and that God's authority was above my own. And moving through those feelings in that prayer process meant that for the first time I realised, now I'm starting to pray, and now I'm starting to actually honour God's authority and honour God's knowledge in that process. So I would encourage you towards prayer.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So if we go to Chang and then across to that way there, and on this side, if we go just, yep.
I just had a question. What do you enjoy doing in the spirit world? Like a couple of things you enjoy.
It's a very Chang question. Doesn't want to hear about any trauma whatsoever.
I mean, there's lots of things that I love. I love nature, and I spend a lot of time in the natural world, what you would call the natural world. I enjoy solitude as well. So being alone in the natural world, swimming. I love swimming. I love being around trees, being below trees, and praying in those places. So at the moment, that's my favourite pastime. Because I'm here in the fifth sphere, and I'm really involved in this longing for God's definition of who I am as a soul. I find I'm seeking solitude more, but in this beautiful natural world that exists here. There's water and fish that you wouldn't imagine, and just trees and insects, and like all kinds of sort of intricate parts of the natural world, what you would call the natural world here. And I just sort of birds, and it's wonderful. Yeah, so that's my favourite thing to do at the moment.
Thank you.
You're saying a person who constantly wants engagement with the world around him is generally avoiding solitude. And solitude, there's many times in the spirit world where you're going to need solitude, and there's many times on earth where you need it too in order to progress. So it's just something to bear in mind for your life. Yeah. We're going here, and then here. So yep.
Right.
You first.
Before I get to the question I was going to ask, you mentioned solitude. I kind of got the feeling, I feel like from learning divine truth, that like kind of solitude is kind of bad, because like for the last year, like I've like had solitude, and I've kind of been like, no, you need to go and like go out back into the world, and like you need to like interact with people, and like I used to be like really like interested in people. But now I've been in like solitude, and then it's so like now you're saying solitude is like good in the spirit world. So now it's like, thank God, because like that's what I love the most.
Well, it's not always been my favourite pastime. There's times in everyone's progression where you, at times, the best thing for your progression will be to seek out people and relationships, and to be humble in those places, and to seek God's truth in those situations. And then there's times like the phase that I'm in right now, where solitude is a deeply important part of what I'm working on now and what I'm longing for now. So
yeah, the girl that I feel is my soulmate, she has a song called Solitude, so I thought that was pretty cool. But my question before was, Jesus has talked a lot about like young men having like the save the world emotion, and like I know that I have that, and I don't want to, because like it disgusts me just knowing that I have it. So like my question was, like, did you feel like if you're talking about wanting to be like a leader on earth and stuff, do you feel like if you were a leader on earth when you wanted to, that you would have been arrogant about it?
No, I actually think that if I had have taken more physical actions to lead on earth, that I would have dealt with some of my arrogance.
Yeah.
Partly I was arrogant because I was dealing with things in a manner to avoid parts of my earth life. I felt like, well, I knew the truth, and it was a way, and it didn't matter if other people did, I knew it, and it was a way of avoiding my fear of others. So I actually think I wouldn't have been an arrogant leader on earth, but I wasn't a leader on earth. I didn't make that choice, and that was part of what meant that I arrived in the first sphere.
For Eugene, it's important to understand that a lot of times you're only arrogant because you get to skip over a lot of interactions with people that you would otherwise have if you were humble. And in to be a leader properly, you're going to have to learn how to be a very humble person, because at the end of the day, a lot of people are going to criticise you, they're going to make fun of you, they're going to ridicule you, they'll put you down, particularly if you try to teach truth to people who don't believe it.
I guess this is the good time to ask it. There's this YouTube channel here in California called Jubilee, and they do like debates and stuff. And Eugene, you just said like you like debates and stuff, and I do too. But it was I'm gonna sign up for it because it's for Christians versus atheists.
Okay,
and obviously I'm not a Christian and stuff, but this question's actually kind of to Jesus and Mary and stuff, because I feel like I have no problem of saying to people like Jesus and Mary are on the earth and stuff, but I would just love the opportunity just to like point out to either to Christians and atheists just like the logic of like divine truth and like just show like how easy to like all that stuff. But like I was thinking like maybe like because like the YouTube channel like it'll get like 3 million views in like one day and stuff. So I was like, if I do it, because like Jesus, you talked about like in the first century, like your disciples and stuff, like they would set you up for like debates and stuff, and it ended up getting you in a lot of trouble. And like, I guess my question was like, I mean, I know you say like don't ask for your opinion and stuff, but I kind of want to know like if you think it like just because.
Well, firstly, let's let Eugene answer you first, and then maybe I will.
My advice as your brother would be to deal with, you're aware that you have a level of arrogance, and to deal with why you're addicted to arrogance. So the motivation to save the world, as you call it, is at the moment largely governed by this desire for importance.
Yeah.
And while you have that within you, that will affect your soul condition. It'll affect your entry to the spirit life. It will also affect how things work out. But if you're humble, you'll deal with that and then taking action to share God's truth on earth, which is a noble pursuit when motivated by love, will bring you a lot of rewards.
I just feel like I think people deserve to know. And like just at least just
but
that's a statement of your arrogance.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
That's right.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. If you just listen to what Eugene said too, if you're motivated by love, and just something I'd like to say to you, is your motivation isn't love at the moment. Your motivation is to compete, to compete in your arrogance. Now, if that's your motivation, and it's interesting too, because a part of your motivation is to also be better than Jesus at it as well. So that's also a part of your motivation. When you have these motivations, you don't realise that if you act upon them as they are right now, you're actually going to cause much more damage than you are going to bring a benefit to people.
Because when I've shared divine truth in the past, it's mainly just caused damage.
Yeah, yeah. And unless the arrogance is dealt with, you will just continually cause damage to people the more you try to share. And in the end, what's going to happen is that it's going to turn them away from listening to
God's truth. Which is what's happened.
Yeah. And we notice this happening a lot with particularly young men in their arrogance, trying to be better or trying to compete with their dads or trying to sort of prove that they know better and things like that. They end up putting themselves in positions that end up in people having a poor. It sort of brings divine truth into disrepute rather than actually demonstrating its benefits. And in that place, you can do a lot of damage when you think you're trying to help, but actually it's motivated by the desire for, firstly, your own prominence, rather than that it be God's truth that is prominent.
I actually feel like my main motivation for doing it is that like, so if everybody else knows that Jesus is on the earth and like knows the truth and stuff, then I won't have to explain it to other people and like, you know, and stuff like that. Like,
yeah, and also that would mean then that they'd want to hear from you, and therefore look up to you, and because you knew it first and things like that.
It was really that of knowing it first, of being like the first,
Yeah. And, you know, if I had that attitude, even though I was the first to know it, if I had that attitude, nobody in the first century would have listened to me either. And also, ironically, you can't enter a relationship where you become at one with God with that attitude. And in fact, as Eugene's pointed out, you can't even exit the first sphere with that attitude. So this is where you need to be quite circumspect. So while Eugene's saying, yes, you need to be able to share divine truth, you also need to make sure you're sharing it with an attitude where you've actually got humility, not that you're trying to fake humility or that you're trying, or any of those things, but you actually need to develop humility as a quality.
Yeah, my problem was I had a flaw in my character which said that I I wanted to know the truth, but in a way that wouldn't challenge the people or my position, my where I was in society. So I let fear govern me. The flaw in your character is more about
almost the opposite.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking. Because you said it, and I was thinking, yeah.
So, sorry, I didn't mean to stop Eugene, but you
That's
can
okay.
explain what
That's
the
okay.
opposite is, because it's important to be specific with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's more about superiority and trying to gain a sense of direction and purpose that is more important than others, rather than developing the character to see everyone on the earth and in the spirit life as your equal brother and sister, regardless of what they believe or what they know. And when you do that, then is the time to share. But you will find that there's other emotions then to confront, because you will approach the sharing of divine truth with much more character or much more principle, and that will mean that you know that you can't meet your addictions through the sharing, and then there'll be other fears and things, ironically, that will come up. That's the same for everyone, really, coming from a place of sin. That there's, if one approaches any endeavour with integrity, you find that there's certain challenges you know you will face because you're unwilling to break God's principles in the process.
Yeah. At the moment, you are willing to break God's principles in order to share God's truth, which actually fundamentally means you're not sharing God's truth.
Doesn't make any sense at all, yeah.
Okay, we over here. Yep.
Hi, Eugene. My question is more along the mother injuries that you talked about. I feel like I relate to a lot of them, a lot of the things you've been talking about. I was curious about, you were talking about one of the difficult feelings that you had to work through was, well, you felt like you wanted to have the perception of yourself that your mom had of you, something along those lines?
Yes.
Can I just stop you, though, for a moment, Miriam? Each of you notice, are more focused again back onto your emotions. And each time, Eugene's trying to focus you on your beliefs. And you're not even hearing him say that hardly. He every time he's saying, there's the belief you have, there's the belief you have. And then when it comes back to what you want to talk about, you're saying, my emotion about my mum or whatever. And the thing to be more reflective upon is when Eugene's giving you answers, he's talking to you about your beliefs, right? Not your spiritual beliefs. So, and there's still not a very strong, in your own minds, there's not a very strong correlation between the emotion you face and the beliefs you have. And this is something that he's trying to address, but it's almost like most of you are still going, oh, but there's the emotion, but there's an emotion. So the reason why I'm stopping you is I'm saying, okay, let's refocus this question. What's your beliefs with your mother rather than your emotions with your mother?
Okay.
Can we ask him that question instead?
Sure. You had a belief that you were what you felt your mom felt about you, which was elevated, maybe. I think maybe you said something along those lines.
Yeah, I believe that there were certain challenges that I didn't need to face in life because in my relationship with my mother, she taught me that. She taught me to believe that there were certain things that I shouldn't have to deal with, not just in a physical sense, but in an emotional or spiritual sense. So for example, when I was doing the work with spirits and channeling, and that effort would be enough for me to be rewarded more than I actually was rewarded, because I neglected doing the more that I could do. The beliefs that I had through that relationship were, whatever I try to do and I think it's good enough, well, that should be enough to be rewarded. It didn't encourage me to look at what my full potential was. It was to accept what was comfortable for me to do, and that was the really, that should be rewarded, rather than me considering the full potential I had or the full set of actions I could take.
Can we say it another way? Can we say it like this? I put in this much effort and I should get this much result.
Okay.
And his belief, because his mum just let him put in a little bit of effort and then she did the rest for him.
And I got a lot of accolade as well for this small amount of result.
Yeah, so now he thought, if I put in this amount of effort, I should get this amount result, because that's what I got in my relationship with my mother. Okay. Just a tiny little bit of effort and I got lots of results. So. And
it also caused me to think that to not even, if I was honest, I could see that I could put in this much effort, but I felt, well, that result, this much effort
should be enough.
Should be enough, yeah.
Which was the belief you imbibed from your mother.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Through that what you might call favoured relationship with her, which of course I came to feel in my entry to the spirit life wasn't that beneficial.
Yeah.
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 I hope this doesn't go back to the emotions, but
give it a stab and we'll see.
I'll give it a stab. Okay.
Yeah.
What did it look like, and what did you to work through that emotionally? What were the feelings?
How did he let go of that belief?
Yeah, what was the process that it looked like to let go of that belief? Yes.
Yeah, I was shown a lot of when I entered the spirit world, and again, this is something that you could do for yourself. I know that your guide would help you to do this, but I was shown a lot of situations in my life, and really was almost shown the measure of how much effort I put in to love, or to be truthful, and how much I could have put in. So I was given specific examples, I was shown, and of course that...
So there's a lot of embarrassment.
Yes.
Okay. In other words.
that began to work on me.
Yeah.
And, I felt shame, embarrassment, and I could no longer feel as pleased with myself about the effort that I put in. Eugene
had to face the facts. He only put this much in. So how come he's expecting that much as a result when he only put this much in?
Okay. And how come how could I say I was a good and loving man when by being shown these examples, it was very obvious that there was a lot more that I could have done to love, that there was a lot more I could have done to give, to further truth on earth. These things were very apparent to me, and there was quite a lot of pain about that to feel.
Yeah.
That really helped me to receive God's truth and let go of the beliefs that my mother had sort of trained me in.
Yeah, a lot of young men in your position are sort of laconic with their life, aren't they? They're sort of laid back and go, I only have to get this much done and everything's going to work out. I'll still be able to eat and I'll still be able to survive and I'll still be able to get a relationship and I'll still have my friendships and everything will be fine. I'll just put in this amount of effort. And they're not realising that actually the laws of the universe, God's laws, are driven by how much love you have for the thing. And when you're laconic about things, when you're just laid back about things, you don't have much love for anything. Because love creates passion. Does that make sense? And therefore creates drive as well. And a person who just sort of lays back and just thinks, just a little bit of effort, that's good enough, and I should get a good result from that. You're not seeing that actually you're actually inputting very little love into it.
And I was someone on earth who I wouldn't have said I was laconic. These are issues that are much more pronounced on the earth today, I would say, or perhaps much more pronounced for yourself, Samir, and other people in the audience than they were for me.
And particularly for men who have been brought up the same way.
Yeah.
For men who have been brought up in this extreme with their mothers in particular. Yeah. Same with women with their dads, by the way.
Yeah. But the reason I say that it was not as pronounced is that it still had a very large effect on me, even though I did do some things in my life and I did develop some passions and I did
love some things
more and I did value having a life of integrity to some degree. There was still so much more that I could have done. And this is a very big regret of many people who enter the spirit world, being shown the things that they could have done
but didn't.
But didn't.
Thank you, Eugene.
So when you experience, can you see the emotion is going to come from being faced with the truth? So what happened with Eugene? Some spirit friends helped him face the truth that, you know, this is how he lived his life. And then in facing that truth, he came to his own personal feelings of, wow, that's pretty sad really. And, you know, and then he had feelings about sadness to feel, but also some like guilt and shame to feel as well as a part of the compensation for doing that. And realising, I wasn't as motivated as purely as I thought I was at times, you know, things like that. And you sort of go through these moments of regret that you thought you were, but you really weren't, you know, and you come to acknowledge the truth. And the beautiful thing about getting helped individually, as Eugene's experienced, and all of you will experience at some point, is that you're shown something, and then in comparison to what you thought it was, you know, so you thought, this is what I was doing. And when you're showing it from God's perspective and it's this much, like, or even an ant's amount, you know, like in comparison to what, you know, you thought you were doing.
Yeah.
And when you start comparing what you thought you were doing with what you actually did, you start to have some feelings come up as a result of that process.
And I would say that was the major motivation for me then to start to long for God's definition or God's set of beliefs about what I was capable of, what love was. So really the truth helped to expose my false perception, if you like. This false perception, this set of beliefs that had come from my mother, I did eventually come to deal with some emotions, because I know you're talking about emotions, but eventually come to deal with some emotions about my mother. But first I was shown the truth from God's perspective, and that's something that I would encourage you towards as well, to start to long for. Be reminded of events in your life and be shown what more you could have done or what more your potential was in that place. And the pain and shame and embarrassment of that for myself was enough for me to start to long for some different definitions or different truth. And in that process, as I long for that from God, then emotions surrounding my relationship with my mother were released from me. But it was really the truth first and the longing second, and the longing was really for more of God's definition surrounding myself, that helped me release the issues with my mother. So I didn't start at Mum, I started at what could I have done more in my life on earth.
So it's like yesterday, he started realising that applying the universal truth to his personal internal world was going to be the thing that benefited the most. And once he did that, certain emotions were going to come up naturally as a part of that experience. Yeah.
And really, I'm very grateful to my brothers and sisters here who helped me in that process, because they didn't focus me on showing me, here's the truth of your relationship with your mother. They showed me, here's the truth of your life so far, and here is the ways that it's missed the mark of love, and allowed me to have feelings about that process. And then they that process led me to beliefs and emotions and the dynamics with my mother that were naturally released. I was more motivated because I'd been shown the truth about my own potential at that point.
Okay. So the beliefs weren't the focus at the beginning. It was more being exposed to the truth of your condition.
Well, the truth exposes false beliefs, doesn't it? So you can see, in a way, the beliefs were the focus, but by getting the truth, the false beliefs get exposed.
Yeah, I would say more that my point was more the truth helped expose the false beliefs I had about my own potential. I then longed for God's truth about my own potential. And in that process, issues surrounding my mother and the origins of my false beliefs were exposed. But I didn't start the process focusing on what are my false beliefs with my mother.
Okay.
It was more, what is the truth
Of my life.
Of my life.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of times, for example, we find we're having conversations with people and they ask me about emotions about their mother, and frequently instead of answering that, I'll answer them by talking about the truth of their attitudes towards women, for example. And they go, but I didn't ask about women, I asked about my mother, and I feel grief with my mother. And I go, but start looking at your attitudes towards women. This is what's now playing out in your life right now, is your attitude towards women. In this case, Eugene's saying that his relationship with mother even affected his attitude about how much effort he was going to put into something, and how much worth he attached to certain things, and how much priorities he put on those particular things. And he didn't realise that until he was shown, this was your priorities and this is the effort you put in. And does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Until he was shown his actual actions, there was no way of identifying false beliefs in any way at all. He had to come basically face to face with himself, saying, this is the life you've lived. Look at it. Look at the life you're living. Yeah.
Exactly.
Which then created the motivation
and that
to
creates
go further.
The motivation to find out the beliefs that are false, and also what is the truth. And once you find out what is truth and what is false, then you start feeling some pretty big feelings, like regrets and shame and guilt and sadness. And in the process of feeling those feelings, you then end up feeling like, oh, I can see this. Eventually you get to see, oh, that came from my mum actually. And my relationship with my mum, what I preferred to get from my mum and things like that. But that's sort of at the end of the process, not at the beginning. Mm. Yeah.
Initially, being shown the truth exposed the belief. Each situation, I would be shown what more I could have done or could have achieved, and I could feel, I believed that I couldn't or I shouldn't have to take those extra actions. So the beliefs were exposed just through exposing me to the truth, I suppose. But the pain of that then created the motivation to really seek out where those beliefs had come from. And really that happened as a natural process.
Yeah. Now, you've already seen this a lot with the channeling we've done while we've been in San Diego, because remember the spirits we channeled who believed in reincarnation. As soon as we started talking about, all I had to say is reincarnation is false. And as soon as I said that group of spirits all of a sudden had emotions. What? False? What? I've been believing this for thousands of years. What are you talking about? False? And, like there's all this confusion, there's all these other things start coming up because they were just faced or confronted with the belief being false that they had always thought to be true. Mm-hmm. Make sense? Mm-hmm. Now, this also applies to beliefs about yourself. When somebody shows you the truth of what you've done and then you compare that to your belief about yourself, you go, what? I didn't know I was like that, but my actions show that's what I was like. And then you that starts bringing up emotion, and then you start working on that. If you're unwilling to look at the truth, then obviously then you can just stay in denial and tune out of it. And the truth is not emotionally affecting you. But as soon as you allow the truth to emotionally affect you, now all these things will start coming up once you're faced with a false belief or what is the truth. Mm-hmm. That makes sense to me? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And this is the same thing as to whether it's a spiritual truth in the sense of like a universal spiritual truth or a spiritual truth relating to your own internal system of beliefs.
Mm.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. If we come over here, straight across, yes. The one behind, sorry. Yeah, sorry.
Okay. If I remember correctly you said you're in the fifth sphere. Is that when you cross over to the sixth, is when you do the soulmate union? Is that? No. Okay. So that was a misunderstanding on my part. However, you stated that you're trying to ask God like who you are in certain aspects, but obviously that requires the other half of you. well, I guess I said that incorrectly. Maybe it requires, I guess, wanting to know the other half of you more, because it's...
Yeah, and this point in my progression, I feel I'm really longing to feel from God that there are two parts of me, that I'm not just this...
Just one.
So I've known about that concept since my life on earth, but I'm now in a point in my progression where I really want to receive from God the full conception of what that means, what that experience is like, what is God's definition of who I am as a soul, as an entity.
So fundamentally, you're asking, has he met his soulmate, right?
Well, yeah, but and obviously
and he's trying
I
to
want
explain
to
to
know.
you the process that he's going through. Even if he's met his soulmate, this is a process he still has to go through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My understanding at this point in my progression is that I won't fully recognize or experience my soulmate in a loving way until I receive this from God, this knowledge from God, this soul-based knowledge from God.
Okay, so I guess I have certain beliefs that, and fears, that I wouldn't be able to meet my particular soulmate until the spirit world, right?
Till the fifth sphere.
Till the fifth sphere, which to me seems like, oh my gosh, how am I going to get there, right? Because it brings me excitement to the soulmate. I love love, obviously, I think that, but I have a lot of injury involved. Is there anything that you could give, I guess, advice to as to how we can develop that in this lifetime?
I think your brother and friend has been teaching you how to do that. All of these lessons surrounding love, truth, humility, faith, all of the qualities of developing a character and developing a relationship with God, so a character in line with God's laws and a personal relationship with God, are the quickest ways for you, from my understanding where I am right now, it's the quickest way for you to experience soulmate love. So my
you want to
relationship,
skip all over that?
Yes.
I do.
You do, yeah.
Unfortunately.
You want to go, wherever I am right now I want him.
Yeah.
Or her, right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, but I know that certain injuries, I will attract the same type of person.
You don't understand that even that feeling you have right now is going to make you very open to attracting not your soulmate, but somebody else who fulfills your demand.
Yep.
And my advice would be to develop your own capability to love. On earth, many relationships, and even in your question, is really driven by the desire to receive something from a man. And really, and in my progression, before this point as well, I know that the deeper satisfaction comes from my ability to love women, to love men, to love others, and then in that romantic sense, to give up any addiction that I have had. And I feel that I'm in this place. This is part of why I'm in this process of being able to long for God's truth about the true nature of my soul, is because I have given up many, many addictions and demands upon the opposite gender that now make me open and free in this process.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're just take a lot of care with trying to skip over all of the principles in order to get a result, because in the end,
the result will be bad.
Always bad. Like the law of attraction is such that every time you skip over principles in order to get a result, the result will always be bad. Right. So until you heal the feelings you have towards both genders inside of yourself, you're not going to really be open to receiving God's truth about who you are and therefore who your soulmate is. And you can also hear from Eugene too, he said he's looking at who he is. Like, he's not searching for the other half of himself. He's looking at who he is, understanding that he needs to come to terms with who he is so that he is able to firstly recognise and secondly engage in a loving manner the other half of who he is. Yeah. Makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. And this is the first time he's doing it. Right? And it's taken him some time to get to that position. Now, of course, it doesn't have to take this long to get to the position where you do it. And on earth, it doesn't have to take that long either. It just depends on what your priorities are. As you can hear from Eugene, his priorities, after receiving divine love just a few times, his priorities become a bit warped, they changed, he became a bit arrogant. He was also not dealing with some things in his day-to-day life on earth, which meant that because he wasn't dealing with them on earth, it was only going to be when he hit the fifth sphere that he started dealing with these things. That makes sense? Yeah. You can deal with these things on earth, but the average person wants to skip over all of the principles and just get the result. Being with my soulmate. That's the result I want. Yeah. Almost everybody who ever says to us they know who their soulmate is, they don't know. That's almost without exception. Yeah. If we go to, yes, to you, Boris. Yeah. Yep.
Hello, Eugene. Thank you so much. It's been so helpful. I also relate a lot to the injuries that you described. And my burning question is, as I'm building my desire to know God and to build a relationship with God, I'm also aware that I'm quite close to the feminine side of God. So my question is, what are some of the God's feminine side of God nature and qualities that have been most helpful to discover for you to build that relationship?
It's very difficult to describe. It almost feels a little blasphemous or a little beyond beyond the scope of language to describe God's. It's diminishing of God's qualities. It feels diminishing of God's qualities to try to describe them in words. Obviously, to convey them in feelings would be better. But the ultimate thing is to receive the feelings from God. And I think that God is I don't feel that it's correct for me to try to describe those things for you. I feel it's very important for you. It won't assist you in your progression if I describe qualities to you. The only way for you to grow in your progression is to receive the experience of those qualities from God herself, and that will require effort on your part as well it should.
Yeah. Can I suggest, Boris, that if Eugene did describe God's qualities, his feminine qualities to you, you'd be very tempted to take all of that intellectually, not feel any of it, and then to believe you know what it means to connect to the feminine side of God when you're not actually doing it. You follow? And the big issue we face in describing a lot of things that we teach is this issue that unless you're feeling things, you really aren't going to understand the answers very well anyway. So, and this is why in the spirit world generally, you're never taught something beyond your current condition. Yeah.
And also I feel from you, brother, that you want something appealing to long for. But if you don't feel that there's anything appealing in femininity, then that is the first issue to deal with.
Yeah.
Your lack of faith that there is anything appealing in femininity is the first issue for you to deal with.
Yeah. So that obviously comes in towards your beliefs surrounding women. Like, what do you believe about women? So a lot of men don't realise they have a lot of beliefs surrounding women that include things like like women should look after me. They should make me feel good about myself. They should make me feel like I'm a strong man. They should make me feel like I'm the boss. They should make me feel, you know, there's all these beliefs often encouraged by your own mother to believe, but there's all these beliefs. And while you have them, you are not going to be able to receive from God the definition of feminine qualities, of God's feminine qualities. Because all of these beliefs you have are basically opposing the feeling of those qualities.
And if you're honest with yourself, you can feel there's quite a bit of rage in you towards women. And this rage is created by false beliefs that you have about femininity, and created by beliefs, entitlement beliefs, such as the one Jesus, some of the ones Jesus explained as well. So dealing with that anger will help you a lot, more than any words I could say. Yeah.
Thank you.
I just need to check the time. Sorry, I just grabbed this wrist that's not being used by Mary. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I think we're...
Maybe one more question, shall we? And then we probably want to move on, I think. So perhaps if we go to... We haven't had you before, have we? Yeah, no, I mean today with this. Yeah, I don't think so. So let's go.
Hi, Eugene. Thank you. I'm being really confronted right now because you're describing a position as a son with a mother, and I'm just listening to you, and I'm being confronted and being shown because I'm being asked to being revealed the truth. I just want to stay in a space of willingness, and my son is God's son is a very sensitive subject for me because it's just been us two for 15 years.
Mm.
And in introducing him to this divine truth, he loves it, but it's also creating a new relationship for him and I that I'm not used to. And so hearing your beliefs and how your mother has impacted you has been very confronting for me. And so my question is, what kind of beliefs did you cross over with that you wish that your mother wouldn't have? Or like how would have, I guess the question I'm trying to format is, being in the position I am now, how do you wish your mother could have approached you with the level of integrity and honesty to help shift your beliefs, if that makes
Or
sense?
even not create them.
Or
in the
even
first
not
place.
create them
Yeah.
at all.
Yeah.
Part of your pain is coming from the recognition that you have created certain ones of these beliefs. In
So much more impactful than I thought. I thought I was being a good mother, and it turns out I'm actually not.
From God's perspective, yeah. Yep.
To consider your question, I think the biggest gift my mother could have given me, had she made a shift while I was still alive on earth, was to really work upon herself and to gain a level of personal responsibility that was lacking in our relationship. So many of the beliefs she instilled in me were there because of certain avoidances that she had in her own life, certain false beliefs that she held on to about her role as a woman. And rather than approaching me with any particular action, I know for certain, and I know as she's made these changes now in the spirit life, that would have impacted me the most. Her change in her relationship to herself would have meant that she automatically withdrew certain feelings and attitudes that she held towards me for a long time, even after I shifted when I entered the spirit life. And the change in those attitudes and projections at me would have impacted me the most. So it wasn't really anything that she would have needed to say or do with me, but rather to come into alignment with God's definition of herself with God.
Can I be more specific about maybe some examples? Your feeling of being a mother is the mother role is very important, but you don't see it as a teacher role. You see it as a mother role.
I thought I did.
Yep. So
I thought I saw it as a teacher. Actually, I've been more or less attempting to, since finding divine truth, like telling myself I'm his guide. I'm not the end all be all.
Yeah.
I know that God is, and so I've really been trying to exercise that. But
you like the feeling of being a mother.
I do, and it's actually right when Mary started channeling, I could. I'm getting shown so much just sitting in here. There's a group of female spirits around me that enjoy controlling men, and in fact, having a son to raise creates an effect where they get to mold a man into what they think that it should be, and it's
correct. Now, can I just point this out? This is where I was headed. Was when you want to mould a man into what you think he should be, that's because you're not with a man who is already someone you admire and long to be with. Oftentimes it's driven by your own loneliness too, isn't it?
And that was what I wanted to say. There's a feeling to gain companionship rather than to lead and teach in the relationship.
That's right. So you need your son to be your male companion, really, rather than to be a child who's going to be taught, right? Now, in that process, he now has a role. His role basically is to fulfill your soulmate relationship without you having to have a soulmate relationship, or without you having to feel the loss of one, or without you having to feel like you don't have one. So in other words, he's now got a role with you. In the process of having a role with you, now you're going to do certain things that you're trying to demand towards him. You're going to want him to feel certain ways towards yourself. And then he'll feel like he has to feel those ways towards you and won't want to. But that then also causes him to detune from his own soulmate longings, because now he's now being forced by a woman to have feelings that he doesn't really want to have, right? And so these dynamics enter the child coming from the mother in this case, right? Now, you can see, as Eugene said, if mum had dealt with those feelings where she doesn't have any of those feelings towards her son, can you see how greatly different the son would feel towards women and towards his life and towards how much he has to do in his life? He would feel like he has to be more responsible in his life. He would also have to feel like he has to be more considerate of women, because mum considers him, but he doesn't have to consider women in that relationship with his mum. And so you can see that if mum changed, then there would be a lot of flow-on effects towards the son. Does that make sense? Now, it doesn't mean the son's guaranteed of change, but if mum changed, there'd be none of these pressures for the son to sort of accede to mum's will anymore, right? And that's going to have a huge effect on the son. And this, by the way, applies between fathers and daughters as well. And so frequently, it's the lack. A lot of parents see how their children are growing up and they go, oh, making mistakes here and making mistakes there and so forth. And instead of going, I need to change myself, my beliefs, my feelings, my actions need to change. Instead of doing all that, they go, what can I do to undo the guilt that I feel about what I've done to my children?
That's exactly correct.
Yeah. And that's probably the feeling driving your question, really, right? And so what Eugene's saying is focus on healing yourself with love, truth, humility and faith. Focus on that. And focus far less on what he should be doing or what changes you feel he should be making, and instead focus on the changes you must make, right? And Eugene's saying if his mum had done that, it would have helped Eugene then work through his own issues. But see, because his mum didn't do that, Eugene continued in his own issues for longer, partly because he wasn't ever faced with the false beliefs of his own issues. His mum hadn't made changes enough to face him with them. In fact, Eugene made changes before his mother did, which meant his changes had the opposite effect, like had the confronting effect on his mother, not the other way around, right? So you've got to bear in mind that unless you make substantial changes, it'll be your children that probably change first, that force you into those substantial changes one way or the other generally, right, in terms of coming to awareness of what's really gone on. And so the gift you can give your children is by you doing it first, rather than working in your guilt with your children, asking them to do it first. That makes sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks, Eugene, for all of that.
Thanks for
that's
having
great.
me.
Yeah, it's our pleasure. It's great that sometimes when we channel people, most of the audience don't, know them at all, or don't know their history at all. So until we talk about it, it's a bit harder sometimes for them to connect to them, But it's been great that you could come along and share that. And
thank you, and thank you for all the work that you're doing.
yeah, no, thanks for that. And obviously, Mary and I might get a chance to talk to you again at some point privately. Yep. G'day. Well, thank you.
It was jolly.
Fifth Sphere Spirit, pretty happy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So the main reason why I wanted to do that with you this afternoon was to show you how most people come to terms with the truth. Remember yesterday morning when I began our conversation with you, I said there's this external truth that God has that many of you are fascinated by, right? And you continue to be fascinated by. And then there's this internal stuff that many of you feel like almost the complete opposite. Like, I don't want to know any of it. And yet, unless you come face to face with your life one way or the other, you are not going to ever face the internal truth, and therefore never will benefit from the external truth. So Eugene, even though he knew the external truth when he was on Earth,
passionate about it, yeah, fascinated and passionate. Yeah.
It didn't really benefit him a lot, aside from the fact that just for a couple of times he received God's love. But aside from that, it really had no other effect on him while he was on Earth, other than that. And the main reason why that is the case is because he never brought it into himself and faced up, sort of compared his own life to the external truth he was learning and said, where am I measuring up and where am I not measuring up? So this is not an act of self-criticism. This is an act of what all of you will be faced at some point, where you end up having a desire to know where you're at, not because you want to tell yourself you're in the fifth sphere when you're not, but because you want to know exactly from God's perspective where you're at. Because if you know that, then you know what needs to be changed. And the key is to be humble enough to see where you're at. Now, anybody who loves you and who is in a state where they can tell you where you're at is going to benefit you. But it's not going to be pretty, because many of you believe where you're at, similar to how Eugene felt. He felt he was in the fourth or fifth sphere. That's where he thought he was at. And then he arrived in the first sphere. So not necessarily a terrible place in the first sphere, but he arrived in the first sphere, and one of the feelings he had was terrible disappointment, because his own idea of where he was at didn't match where he ended up. Right? And that was because he didn't face reality when he was on Earth about where he was at. Does that make sense to all of you? He didn't face God's truth of this is where you really are right now. Right? Now, you can, to face God's truth about where you are right now, there has to be a passionate desire in you to know where you are right now. Right? And whenever a person's in a state of arrogance or when they're in a state of self-deception, they are never wanting to know where they are right now. And in not knowing, you've got nowhere to start your journey. And you just don't start your journey if you don't know where you're starting from. And so it's very important to come to terms with the fact that anybody who loves you, and anybody in the spirit world who loves you, and many of them are trying to love you right now by showing you where you're at on certain things. They're trying to show you. And many of you are going, get away from me. You just think I'm a bad person. You know, you're saying, you're just treating me like I'm a bad person and I know I'm better than that.
This is negative spirit
This is so much negative spirit influence. And Jesus warned me against people like you, like giving me all this negative talk about me. And, and this is how many of you are actually sort of responding to the actual guidance from loving spirits. Because, I find it really fascinating, because what's often happening is this. The unloving spirits who want to meet your addictions and who want you to stay in your addictions, you're going, oh, he's a nice friend. Oh, you're so lovely. Thanks for telling me how nice I am all the time. And isn't this wonderful? What do you want me to do for you? Like that. And you're acting like that with them, acting like they're your friends, right? And then on the other side, you go into the ones, on the other one of the, it's like, so it's like this, right? Good spirit, blue. Evil spirit, red. And on this side, you're going, get away from me. You're telling me things about myself I don't want to listen to. You obviously have a bad conception of me. You really don't know me very well, do you? And this is what you're saying to the spirit, who actually knows you better than you know yourself in many cases, right? And knows your motivation better. And so the net result of all that is you're gravitating towards the very spirit influence that you say you don't want to gravitate towards, right? And also rejecting the very spirit influence you say you want help from, right? And it's fundamentally because you can't handle the truth about yourself. You can't handle it. What's that movie? Jack Nicholson. In All Good Men, wasn't it?
A Few Good Men.
A Few Good Men or whatever. You can't handle the truth, so I handle it all for you, right? That kind of thing. And the biggest problem most of us face is that we can't handle the truth about ourselves. This is where most of us on earth go astray. We're not willing to face up the truth about ourselves. We're willing to attack ourselves, pull ourselves down, but not willing to face the truth about ourselves, right? We're also willing to prop ourselves up and make ourselves feel good about ourselves. We're also willing to do that, but not face the truth about ourselves, right? To actually progress, we need to face the actual truth as God sees it about ourselves. And most of us would like that truth to be something like that makes me feel like, pretty good, right? Right, that's how most of us are, really. We want to be propped up in our own opinion of ourselves. And when that doesn't happen, we just attack ourselves instead. But both of those things are not facing truth about yourself. A person who's truly wanting to face truth about themselves is happy to receive the truth, look at it, look at the evidence. The way you treat others is evidence. The way you treat yourself is evidence. The way you treat your children is evidence. The way you treat your family members is evidence. The way you treat the environment is evidence. Look at the evidence. Examine the evidence and ask yourself, am I acting in a condition of love towards all of these things, right? Look at the evidence and then be aware that you're perfectly willing to distort the evidence in favour of yourself. So it's very important that you start getting not the opinions of others who are also willing to distort the evidence in favour of themselves, but rather to start getting someone's opinion, like either spirits who are not willing to do that, or God who is not willing to do that, their opinion and their help to assess. So as you've seen with Eugene, he had some spirits come along to help him, and they showed him what he did with his life. They said to him things like, look at what you did here. See how you were engaging these spirits there, these Catholic spirits, and you were willing to have arguments with those Catholic spirits, but when it come to the Catholic minister in your own backyard, you weren't willing to have the conversation with him. Instead, with him, what you wanted to do is wait till he passed and then have the conversation with him. Right? And so they show him pictures like that, and you go, and then he's come face to face. Well, why? I thought that I had courage by talking to all these Catholic priests in the spirit world, but actually in my day-to-day life, I'd never acted in courage with regard to them. Does that make sense? So it helped him face some truths, and then that helped him face his beliefs, and then that helped him face his emotions. Right? By coming face to face with the truth, that's what happened. So when it comes to your beliefs that all matter, you're not going to face what they are until you face some realities about your life. You're going to have to come to terms with what's actually going on with your life, and that it's under your control. You know, it's to do with your condition that it's happening. Come face to face with that. And that takes courage. It takes some bravery. It also means you're going to have to face some feelings, and you're going to have to come face to face with the fact that for many of you, you're not as bad as you think, and for many of you, you're not as good as you think. Right? You're going to have to come to face to face with these particular issues. The best time to do it is now. Now. Because, the problem with not doing it now is if you start doing it next year, you're going to have a years of regret as well added to that. Does that make sense? By not doing it now and waiting to the spirit world, you're going to have how many years between now and the spirit world's regret, with all the subsequent feelings of that. That makes sense? You're best doing it now. That's the time to do it. Robert?
Just to be clear, you're saying it's not very valuable to solicit the opinions of others who are sort of like...
Well, it depends, doesn't it? If the person is more loving, then soliciting their help might be helpful. However, demanding their help is unloving.
And I'd been seriously considering how to engage people I thought I may have harmed.
Yes.
But I also know that they definitely don't share the definition of love and truth
that God has.
That God has.
Yep.
And so that's made it very hard for me to understand like what the real value of that would be.
Yeah. Well, it sometimes can help you come to see. There's many people I've approached and talked to about how I've treated them in the past, but I've always gone after I've listened to them. I've always gone away and gone, well, what's God's opinion about what they're saying? Like, is that actually accurate too? Like, but there is something to bear in mind. If you do feel a sense of guilt in your past behaviour, then it's probably because some parts of your past behaviour haven't been good.
Right.
So, firstly, focus on all of those. But see, the average person doesn't want to feel guilt. That's why they don't want to look.
Yeah. But I think, if I'm understanding you, you're sort of saying, look, I can see that, say I've harmed Jesus, but Jesus doesn't even think that it's harmful, or he doesn't think that it's harmful in the way that I now think it's harmful.
Right.
But that doesn't diminish the value of saying to the person, I harmed you in this way. This is harm. Because that's the truth, isn't it? So that there is... But
what you're saying, though, is how do I tell whether when somebody comes to me and says, you've harmed me in this way, and you go, have I or have I not? No, it's hard. If you don't have God's opinion, can you see it's going to be...
Very hard.
Right.
You might be being blamed for something that wasn't even your fault.
Right, and that's I'm actually saying both of those things.
Okay,
Correct.
Correct. We picked it up.
Yeah. So
if you're sure by God's definition that you've harmed the person, even if they don't agree, there's value in being truthful, isn't there?
Yeah. Just saying it.
Yeah. Well, because it also, at some future point, they might look back at that and go, oh, actually, this is what Robert meant. This is happening, But then if people are just approaching you going, you've harmed me this way and you've harmed me that way, and then you have to work on your relationship with God to establish which bit was harm and which bit was not.
Pretty much everyone in my life was doing that when I started. Like, everybody was saying that I was
the harmful
person all the time. So when I left the religious faith I was in, everybody around me, nobody would speak to me. They all said that I was the one doing harm by leaving that faith. And I actually felt, from God's perspective, it was the one good thing I'd done in the last few months, was to leave it, sort of thing. And everyone around me was saying it was the very worst thing I'd done. In fact, they were saying that from then on, all of them, my family and everyone, treated me as if I was dead. Wouldn't speak to me, wouldn't acknowledge me in any way, wouldn't talk to me. If I had died, there was a period in my life whereas if I had died, nobody would have known for years, actually. Yeah.
But there's even, if you don't mind me saying, but like in your relationship with your sons, areas where you know you've harmed them and they don't think it's harm.
They don't think it's harm.
And then there's areas where you haven't harmed them, but now they think that's harm. You know, because you're not meeting addictions that you previously established.
That's right.
Then they think, oh, that's harmful.
Yeah.
Dad doesn't love me.
This is why it's so important to get the conscience working.
Yeah.
Get God's opinion on everything, because and particularly for myself, it's been important because, you know, when you're the first person doing something, if you don't have God's opinion, you've got everybody else's, and everybody else is going to disagree with you on everything, pretty much. And so in the first century, that's what it was like for me. If I didn't have God's opinion, it would have been terrible because everybody disagreed with me about pretty much everything. And I had to work through, you know, all of that, why they disagreed, what's going on, what their beliefs were, how they felt about it, why they felt the way they did about it, how that affected other people, how that was affecting my beliefs. I had to work through all of those things. And without God, that would have been impossible. You know, it's so hard to come to a proper realization in yourself as to what the truth is. You know, you have to do it, you'd have to experiment on every single level, on every single thing, and measure the results for every single thing. So to accurately do it without God would require thousands and thousands of years of like experimentation, if you're the first. See, many of the people we talk to who've even progressed on the natural love to the sixth sphere, and they've done that, let's say, in 100 years, they haven't been the first to do it. The very first people who did it took tens of thousands of years to do it. So, and the first ones weren't Ammon and Aman because they were slower than some of the others that came along after them. But they took tens of thousands of years to get to the sixth sphere condition because they had to do it through experimentation on every single issue you can imagine. Now, like, I look at that and I go, wow, like when I met those people first, it was some of the people I met in the spirit world, just because I was interested, you know, in finding the people who first reached the sixth sphere. You know, I was interested in talking to them, like, how did you do that? Like, I'd had the experience of having the conscience open and being able to listen to God and talk to God about that. You know, they still had their conscience open, but they weren't even aware how to even use it for thousands of years. How did they do that? What they describe is just this never-ending experimentation of every single thing. And every time the experiment went wrong, they went down in their condition a bit. And every time it went right, they went up in their condition a bit. And so eventually they found the right path by this experimentation process and eventually reached the sixth sphere. And fortunately, they reached that place where they could then teach others to reach it using the same methods they found. But it took them thousands of years to do that. And when I look at that to me, that's pretty amazing that they did it, but also a bit scary in a way, you know, as well, in the sense that, wow, without God, it's just so much effort, you know. And it's also actually impossible to go beyond the sixth sphere without God anyway. So it blows me away that people even did that, given the injuries they imbibed on earth, that they even decided through. Well, look, at the first part, it wasn't even a decision for them. For the first few thousands of years, it was just like the law bringing them into submission, you know, the law of compensation and reparation, bringing them into submission. But after a while, they learnt from their original experiences to actually develop that with a more, you know, direction, with more understanding. But it took them years and years, like I said, thousands of years, not just years. And, you know, if you can do it with God, it's a completely different experience because you're able to have a measure. It feels to me like this. Imagine if we've got a sort of like a pendulum, and that's plumb, you know, that's the plumb centre, which you could say the plumb centre is God's truth, let's say. Let's call that God's truth. Right? Any deviation from that, even the slightest deviation from that is an error. An error, a different direction, isn't it? Any deviation from that. And you can go, you know, deviation all the way around, can't you? But let's say any deviation from that is the error. Now, can you see that if you've got to experiment with every single error before you find the truth, you could be one error after another one after another. This is how many of you are living your lives up to now, right? Experimenting with this, oh, did that work? No, that didn't work. I'm not that happy from that, and do another thing. Many of you have done this with religion even, haven't you? You've gone, that religion, I've tried that for a while, didn't work. I tried one with my family, that didn't work. Oh, well, I did another one and that's not working, and then do another one, it's not satisfying either. And eventually, some of you have come to the point of listening to the divine truth, but it's taken years of experimenting. Like, if we were all taught, you know, that we could just talk to God and get answers if we're humble enough, and we're taught how to use the conscience, then we wouldn't need to deviate. And every deviation would be a purposeful one. It wouldn't be a mistake. For the most of us, we've made lots of mistakes, right, before you arrive at a truth. Now, my suggestion is, if you develop that relationship with God and you're open to your conscience and how that works, and you learn about the conscience and how that works, in other words, you learn about how to receive truth from God that works, right? That's probably the very first thing that needs to be learned. If you can learn that, then every other thing you are faced with, you're going to have that to rely on. You're going to have God's truth from God to rely on with every other thing that you face. But if you don't do that, then it's just going to be this very long-winded and exhausting and sometimes very hopeless, almost trial and error over and over and over and over again. And it's very disheartening, to be honest, having to do this trial and error. And so it's far better if you can develop that relationship with God directly. So when it comes to receiving information from others, the measure of whether that information is going to be valid to you is going to be how close are they to God's truth, isn't it? Because if the person's a long way away from God's truth themselves, right, then obviously anything they say to you, it might be beneficial by mistake, but it's unlikely to be beneficial on purpose, you know. So this is what I've found, is that almost everything that I've been accused of over the course of my progression on earth this time and in the first century, a lot of times I just went, well, I can feel that's unloving, so there's another thing that's unloving. And it sort of just helped me make a list of all the things that were unloving rather than the things that were loving. It sort of helped me what not to do rather than what to do, right? And I found the same in this life. Like, an example of that is every time a spirit comes to me and attacks me, I go, this is good information. I'm obviously doing something better now. Every time a spirit comes to me in an addiction, trying to get me to follow an addiction, I go, this is really suspicious. You know, that's not good. I'll question that for far longer, and before I respond to anything there. And it's the same with a person. If a person comes and attacks me, generally I go, well, there's a good example of what not to do, right? So there's a good example of what, you know. So the person comes to me. There's plenty of people. I receive probably hundreds of emails every year telling me what I'm doing wrong, right? Lots and lots of them. Mostly, a lot of times from young men or women, of course, but lots of them. What I'm doing wrong, and I'm looking at them. Go, what's the feeling in there? If the feeling isn't love, or a focus on God's truth, then I've just got to ignore that email completely. Like I've just got to just delete. And after a while I've learnt, well, if it's from that person, I just delete it. Many people who email me, you just get deleted. Because I know that anything coming from that person based on their condition is just going to be error, right? And sometimes I'll read it so I know what the error is. But by now, you know, by the time you've got 5 or 10 emails from a particular person telling you all your errors, you pretty much know the underlying theme, which is that you're useless and you're not Jesus, and there's no way you could be because you're doing all these things wrong, type of thing. And this is the main, you know, this was the main thing with the job interview we had on Wednesday, sorry. You know, you can't be Jesus because you're not meeting my expectations fundamentally. So you know, once you start working through all of these things, you start realising the only person's information that are going to be reliable are God's and anybody who's at one with God. Everyone else has a fair degree of unreliability. Even a sixth-sphere spirit who might love you will have a fair degree of unreliability when it comes to their assessment about God. Right? So the higher the condition of love, the more you should listen. But of course, listening is different than like taking it on board and then applying it. Like the only ones that I'm going to apply are the people who I know whatever God says to me, plus everything one of my celestial friends says to me, I always listen to and apply. Right? So, and like Mary and I are in a different space than they are in still, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter where their space is. If they're in harmony with God, we can listen and apply. If they're not in harmony with God, you can't listen, and you definitely shouldn't apply. You might be able to listen in terms of what not to do, but definitely shouldn't apply. So I just remind all of you that a part of the thing that needs to be done is to focus your attention on what stops you from being able to be sensitive to the conscience and how it works. Your beliefs will largely be determined by the conscience, right? And your sensitivity to it. The more insensitive you become to it, the less of your beliefs will be real. The less of them will be true. They'll be more false than true. The more you connect to the conscience, the stronger the likelihood is that your beliefs will become more true, right? So I just encourage all of you, and we talk tomorrow, we haven't got time now, but we'll talk tomorrow about how the human soul works on some fundamental levels so that you can understand like what to do about some beliefs about the human soul with regard to emotion, beliefs, the conscience, and a number of other of the soul's mechanisms. But it's very important to come to understand how the soul works and to eventually deal with any belief you have that is opposite to the truth about how the soul works. Because how the soul works is how all of you work, you know, like internally how things operate. And if you can understand how you operate, now you can understand how God can deliver information to you. By what mechanisms does God give you information? You can now know that once you know how it all works. And so, you know, Mary and I, over the past 14 years or so, have talked about qualities such as humility, because that's a very important quality for how the soul works. We've also talked about some principles regarding things like, I think we called it how the human soul works. And it was like the ideas of preclusion and succession and a number of other ideas that I presented there, more technical ideas, but they're all about how the soul works, how your soul, you know, it's your soul, you want to know how it works. Like, I find it so fascinating that the average person knows how their car works, even to a degree. Maybe not so much nowadays, right? But in my childhood, you know, pretty much everybody I knew how the car worked, and yet they don't know how they work themselves, like how their own soul works. It's fascinating that we spend so much time learning how everything around us works without spending any time learning how we work, right? If you think about schooling, one of the very first things we should be learning is how we work, how the actual human soul is designed to work. And if we all did that, then we'd have much stronger connection to the conscience, we'd have much stronger idea of what's true and false as a result, and that would help us greatly in our future life. So learn to have a childlike fascination in about how you work. Like, treat it like a science project. You know what I mean? At the moment, most of us sort of treat life like a, what's the word I'm looking for? It's like a mistake, isn't it? It's like, oh, it just happens to me. And I don't really know why it happens and why I met that person and why this thing happened and why I fell in love with that woman and why I married that person and why we had these children, and I don't understand any of it. It just happened to me one way or the other, you know, why I had those beliefs and why I was in that religion and why I went from that religion to another religion and, you know, why my concept of God has changed over you. I've got no idea why. And once you understand how the soul works, you start understanding how all these things happened. Right? And then you actually have, once you have an emotional understanding of how your soul works, now you have some grasp over how to change it so that the bad things that happen don't get repeated, right? Once you understand how it works. So it's to your long-term everlasting advantage to understand how the soul works. And if whatever you can do to learn about how your soul works, you should do. And it should be a priority in your life because it's you we're talking about. You know, your whole life is happening because of how your soul works. And if you understood it better, then you'd understand how to control your whole life, how to change you could call it, I suppose, destiny, or it's not a planned destiny, but you could change the future of your life by working out how the soul works and working out what do I do to make it work more efficiently, to make my life work more efficiently. It would benefit everyone on earth immensely if this was taught from childhood. Yeah? So what I'd like to see one day is a childhood program that began with first year, number 1 year, would be God. Second year, qualities of God. Nature of God, personality of God. Third year, human soul. Emotions and beliefs. And probably in qualities there should be principles, right? Such as love, what that is, truth, how that feels, humility, how that feels, faith, how that feels. There you go. I've just done a syllabus for the first 4 years of everybody's life. Do you know what I mean? Wouldn't it be wonderful if you be taught these things by the time you think 5 years, 6 years old, 7 years old, 8 years old? By the time you're 8 years old, you would be able to handle all of your own feelings and emotions. You'd be able to understand how your human soul works. You'd understand what a principle is versus what a law is, right? You'd understand what God's personality is to a degree, or God's nature. Now, in the first year, I'm saying God in the sense of God's existence. You teach children how to experiment with God's existence. So everything they do, play, all the things they do, they're experimenting with the existence of God and experimenting with what God may be like, in that year, in a real childlike way. They would have to do it, wouldn't they? Because they have yet to have a developed mind. The same goes with the principles. You start experiment. What does love feel like? When you're loved, what does it feel like? How do you feel when somebody yells at you? How do you feel when somebody attacks you? How do you feel when somebody's kind to you or gives you a hug? How do you feel then? What do you feel? And this is teaching them principles, right? And then by this stage, they're now at a stage where they understand their own feelings to a degree through the principles, and they understand that God exists. So now we can look at, right, what are you created like? There's things inside of you. How do they work? How do your feelings work? How do your thoughts work? And all these things. And it would have to be done at a very, a play-based system, wouldn't it? A system that enables them to physically experiment and emotionally experiment with all of these things. But so what they understand at 5 about God won't be the same as what they understand at 15 about God, but it introduces these topics into their life. And then, of course, in amongst all this, you could still be teaching them how to speak and how to write and how to read and how to, arithmetic and all the fundamentals of like mathematics and science and other things, couldn't you? And as a result of them being open emotionally and open to how their soul works, they would absorb this information far more rapidly as well. So you could actually make that half of the syllabus and the other half this, right? And you imagine if you had grown up in that state where by the time you were 8, you understood these things, right? You think about the effect that would have had on your life. By the time you were 8 to 10, you probably knew what you wanted to do for the rest of your life. You probably would have felt some of your own feelings about what excites you, and you would have taken, you would have started to go along those lines, working out yourself. None of this involves mum and dad either, like pandering to mum and dad's feelings, right? So you would have learnt, you don't need to worry about your mum and dad. They have their own problems, their own feelings and whatever they say to you doesn't really matter much, because unless it's in harmony with these things, it's probably not worth listening to anyway, right? But if you're going to live in their house, then love would demand, one of the principles of love would demand that you actually do honour their laws, as long as they've made them in harmony with God's laws, right? But if they haven't, then you would have to have a talk about that with them as well. So by the time you're 8, you'd also be able to reason with an adult, logically. You'd be able to also reason with them even though they're angry with you. You'd be able to talk to them, right? If this was encouraged. So imagine the scope that would give you for your later life. How many of you are so worried about what everyone thinks of you? And you could have been by 8 years of age not worried about how anybody thought of you anymore, right? Wouldn't that free you, intensely free you from lots of burdens of your life, right? So this is the beauty of understanding and getting educated about beliefs, is that the more education you have, the more potential you have to accept truth and to compare your own life with that truth. That's the point of it. So when tomorrow we start talking about the human soul and what it does, how it works, is what we want to discuss with you a bit. When we start talking about that, start thinking about tomorrow when we do that, start thinking about the impact that's going to have if you honoured it. Like if you respected that's how it worked. Do you follow me? Like if you respect Like, tomorrow we'll learn a bit about emotion and how that all works, right? And if you respect how that worked, what would you do with your day-to-day life compared to what you're doing now? Yeah? So if you can come tomorrow with that attitude of, I want to understand myself better, not from my own perspective, but from the perspective of how I've been created to work, how my soul's been created to operate. Right? And if we can understand ourselves better, there's a very good chance then that once we understand ourselves better, that we can start acting in harmony with love of self in terms of what we do and choose to do in our lives. But if you don't understand yourself, how do you know what loving yourself is? You're not going to know. And this is why most people on earth have no idea what it means to love themselves. For most people on earth, loving yourself means feeding your addictions. That's what most people think loving yourself is. And the reason why is because they have no idea what self is. Because an addictions are not part of you. They're not even yourself. Yeah? They're a sin that you attach to yourself. In the Paget messages, we call them an excreance. Yeah. That attaches itself to you, right? And the reason why that is they are just attachments that can leave you, and therefore they're not part of you. So what is part of you, and what part of you are you going to do? What are you going to do with those parts of you? You know, what are you going to do to train yourself to use those parts of you? You know, that's the thing we want to sort of focus our attention on tomorrow. Make sense? No worries. So you have a question about that? It's not going to be another intellectual question driven by fear, is it?
I mean, based on everything you wrote, it all sounds wonderful to...
But, here's the but. Yeah.
I'm actually going a few steps further and imagining entire humanity in all of existence to be, like, let's say, in the 36th sphere.
Yep.
And I'm still going like, what's...
To be in the 36th sphere, are you saying?
In the soul union state.
Yeah, no, that's not going to be possible, is it?
No?
Well, if you consider free will, some people are going to choose not to do that. Remember, everything up to the sixth sphere, at some point or other, you're going to have to get there. And the reason why I say that is that's the condition of the perfect natural human. And the laws are all made in such a way that given enough time, you will get there. But when it comes to anything above the sixth sphere, the seventh and the eighth, the union state with God, you know, the one with God, and then above that, all of that is completely dependent upon the exercise of your will. Up until the sixth sphere, you could say it's a combination of will and God's will. God's will is that you all become the perfect people you were designed to be, one way or the other, right? That's God's will. And he's created a whole heap of laws that are saying, that's where you're going to be, Si. Now, it might take you 10,000 years, but I guarantee to you, God's saying, I guarantee to you, you're going to get there because my laws are great and they always get people there. Right? The very first people who did it took about 10,000 years. So that's about the longest it's probably going to take for you to get there. You follow me?
Yeah.
Yep.
So in that case, I guess there's no easy way to ask this question, but I'm just going to say it. What's God's end game?
What's God's end game? Well, the reason why God created you is because God wanted you to experience sharing God's love, sharing the experience of God's love. God knew God's love was fantastic. And he wanted to have children that would experience his love. And that's the only end game. There's no other planned destiny, planned goal for you. Now, of course, in that end game, how much you experience that love is going to determine by a lot of truth. It's going to be determined by a lot of truth. So in other words, you're going to have to get more and more and more truth in order to know the extent of God's love. the infinite nature of it, and eventually how much of you can receive is really unknown at this stage, right? But if you focus on that as God's goal, he wants Sai to feel loved and to feel and experience what that feels like. That's why he created the universe we're in. That's why he created the body you have. That's why he created the spirit body you have. That's why he created you as half a soul, so that you can experience, as an experience, all of the things involved with experiencing the love, not just acknowledging it intellectually, but experiencing it. He wants you to experience it. In the process, he wants you to come to discover the truth of how he created everything. But that's going to be an everlasting project. So, in other words, the secondary goal that he had was that create life so that Sai finds it interesting. Because you see, if Sai just went for 5 years and he discovered all of God's truth in 5 years, what's he going to do for the other 10,000 years? Right? He's going to, by the end of 10,000 years, be bored out of his brain, isn't he? So God made it in such a way that you will be constantly fascinated by, as you receive more love, you'll become more and more fascinated by the extra truths you're now able to absorb, because you're becoming more like God as you receive more of God's love, right? Third thing he gave you. He wants all humans to experience what it's like to be immortal like he is. So God's immortal. He can't be destroyed. He can't be killed off. Now, people in their natural love condition in the sixth sphere can't experience that. To experience what it's like to be immortal, you have to receive something from God, a part of God's immortality, right, in order to become immortal. So this whole concept that people have on earth that we're all immortal anyway, so it doesn't really matter what we do, that's not true. We don't know that at all. What we do know is that if you receive a quality from a person who is immortal, now you can become immortal. We know that for a fact, right? So a third part of his goal was so that you could experience immortality, so that you could be constantly fascinated by every new thing that you discover. Because if you didn't have immortality, you'd in the end have an end of an existence. So God wants you to experience an existence with no end, but that has to be your choice to make. Because the only way an existence with no end is possible is by receiving a quality from God, God's love. That's the only way it's possible. There is no other way it's possible. And this is why the spirits in the sixth sphere are very worried about the concept of immortality, because they know they are not immortal, and they are very worried that they're not, because it means that at some point in the future the reason for their existence may end, because there's nothing more for them to learn given the condition they're in, right? And so, God created sort of, firstly, experience the love. And secondly, experience the fascination of discovering truth for the rest of your existence. And thirdly, experience the feeling of being immortal.
Does God have a name that he wants to be called by?
No.
No. That's what I thought. Okay.
In the first century, I called him Yahweh, but, or the English translation of that is Jehovah. And that's what I called him in the first century, but, it was just a name given to God so that people could relate to God. Make sense? I call God Father or Mother, right? And the main reason why is because that's the relationship that we have. We are the created child, right? So, but you can call him Timbuktu if you want, but I don't know whether he'd respond to that either. But, I've never tried calling God Timbuktu and seeing the response. So, who knows what you would like to call him. Can you see things that don't matter to God are things like human laws, human concepts, human ideas. You know, the whole idea of marriage doesn't matter to God. What matters is he created you to be a half of another soul. That's the relationship that matters to him. So the whole concept of you signing a document saying you're married doesn't matter to him either. You know, anything to do with a human construct about God's nature is not going to matter to God. God's way beyond that, way beyond that. And so you will come to feel that as you have a closer relationship with God. You'll feel that. So you feel the things that matter, which are to do with love, truth, and immortality. They are, in the end, the things that will matter to you the most, right? And the things that don't matter, human laws that are out of harmony with God, human documents, human teachings, human ideas, human concepts, your opinion, none of them matter. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yep. All right, guys, well, we'll leave it there today and we'll get on to this subject of what the human soul does tomorrow, huh? Sound good to you? Tomorrow we just need to remind you that Mary and I and the few people involved will have to pack up afterwards, so we won't have much time to spend with you afterwards. I think we have a time we have to be out of here. I think it was 6 p.m. or something tomorrow. So we'll probably go to 4:30 tomorrow, and then we'll need a solid hour probably to tidy up everything. So that will be the general plan tomorrow. We also may do a bit of mediumship tomorrow, talking to some spirits about the human soul as well, because there's a lot of spirits in the spirit world who are struggling with the concept of what is my soul and what do I need to do to make it grow and things like that. So we may involve them in the process tomorrow as well. All right.
We might try something a bit different. We'll see, but maybe just fielding their questions as you're presenting rather than doing a formal mediumship. Yeah.
We'll just involve them as questioners in the discussion.
Like you'd have your microphone, yeah.
Yeah. So Mary will have sort of like the microphone. When she's a spirit, she'll be able to say the spirit and the name and what they're asking about, right? And we'll talk to them a bit in that regard. So that way, you know, because a lot of them hang around for a long time in these discussions waiting for us to say something important. And that often means that to them, they don't feel much I'm saying is important until certain times. And that's because most of us are can't really see in the situation that a lot of the stuff does apply to us, you know. And so unless we have some kind of personal interaction, it helps us to see that things apply. So that's we'll do that tomorrow. And like I said, we'll finish about 4:30 or thereabouts tomorrow. Some of you have invited us to go on dinners and other things, and it's highly unlikely we'll be able to do so. We're leaving, we have to leave here about 11 on Tuesday. On the way to LA, we've got a flight out from LA in the evening. And there's a number of things we need to do, passing back, cars and bits and pieces that we've borrowed from people, and packing gear ourselves, as well as usually our last day is sort of like a big pack-up day, because usually, you know, after you've been in a place for 3 weeks, you sort of, you know, you spread out a bit, and then you've got to get everything back into 4 cases again. So we're not sure is the answer to many of your questions as to whether we can spend any time with you on a social basis. We'll see how we feel tomorrow. Sometimes the days are exhausting and we just want to go home and have a sleep. And other times we feel quite energised depending on the reaction of the audience, and sometimes we've gone out to dinner and stuff with people afterwards, so we'll just see what happens is the answer to that. If any of you tomorrow need to leave before 4, then please feel free to do so. Yep. Okay. Thanks, guys.
See you
tomorrow.